With an hour in the month, our thoughts turn to that delicious, silent hanger-on, the oyster, of which the world's best is the Whitstable native. This year, the oysters are better than ever. They're in excellent condition, due it's thought to the sun having warmed up the water more than usual.
Okay, Mark, give us a clap.
Give me the clap.
Give us the.
You just got back from Thailand.
Yeah, I probably have to clap.
Travis Croxton and his cousin Ryan inherited their grandfather's 200-odd acres of oyster bed leases, family rights that dated back to 1899. In 2001, the leases came up for renewal, and they decided to continue and start farming the beds as a hobby on the weekends. With a lot to learn and a need to repair the conditions, by 2004, they finally had a viable crop and had enough oysters to start selling. They would go to New York on the weekends, dragging a wheeled cooler up and down the subway steps, visiting restaurants, and convincing chefs to use their product. Today, Travis is co-owner with Ryan of Rappahannock Oyster Company and its several oyster and clam farms throughout the Chesapeake. With 5 restaurants in the U.S. today located coast to coast, in 2013, Zagat named him one of the 24 restaurant world power players around the U.S.
Travis,
Hey, Mark, good to see you.
thanks for having us out here at Rappahannock River Oyster Company.
Thanks for coming down, man.
This is a lot different than in my mind I thought it was going to be. First started dealing with you 6-7 years ago or whatever, so you guys were
probably 06 maybe.
right around there. And so you guys were a couple years old at that time, right?
Yeah, place has actually ballooned out quite a bit. Like every season we add something. So this is not how we started by any stretch of the imagination. Started with hardly anything.
So your grandfather, right? This was originally your grandfather's company?
Yeah, so Rappahannock Oyster Company dates back to 1899, where my great-grandfather started leasing grounds from the state of Virginia, oystering. He farmed oysters in the wintertime, and he was a dirt farmer in the summertime. And then my grandfather, his son, kind of made it a bit bigger. He had clients like Campbell's Soup and some other things. And, he told, my father and, my partner, my cousin Ryan's father, their brothers, to go to college, get real jobs. So that's what they did. And so it skipped a generation until Ryan and I resurrected in about 01, 02.
So did you go to school for anything related to this industry?
I went to school for finance.
So yes, in a roundabout way.
And
Yeah, I never, it's funny, as long as I've known you, I've never asked that question. I was thinking about it right up here. I'm like, I wonder what he was actually planning on doing.
What the hell did he do? Yeah, I didn't plan on anything. I just went to college, went that course. Actually have a master's of science in finance. Hardly ever use it, but it's helped out on occasion.
Yeah, a little bit, I bet.
Yeah.
We'll get to that in a little while. And then Ryan, what about him? What was his? Did he go to college for something, or was he did he stay at home to work?
Yeah, he went to college. We joke about it. He's got a master's also. He went down to Old Miss and studied Southern literature. Got a master's in that. Then he did some travel guides, some book work. He was extra in a few movies and such like that. But then, we were just, he was actually living with me at the time that my parents, my father, his dad were like, hey, we're leasing from the state every year, paying a fee. We're tired of it. If you guys are interested in taking this over, go for it. So at the time, we're like, okay. Did not understand what that meant at the time.
Right. So had you spent any time, did you ever come up here and help out in the summers, or?
No, I mean, it didn't exist. So we,
so he was just basically, it kind of died out. And so the spot you were paying for,
you actually,
leased out.
you renew your leases yearly, but you also have a seven-year cycle where you re-up for another 7 years. So it was that second cycle after our granddad passed away that they were like, hey, and it was just like a couple $100.
Right.
But we were like, no problem. So yeah, we didn't know anything about it. We had no boats, no buildings, no equipment. We had nothing. except for the lease of about 100 acres, and then just luckily the internet at the time.
Right.
So we Googled, or actually at that time, Netscape, how to grow oysters.
That's right. Is that what you did? You started
Exactly
off
what
with
we did.
That's awesome. Because, you know, in my mind, it was like, I always thought, like, you know, you've got that idea of what, like, an oyster processing thing would look like. You know, you see the pictures from, like, Alaska and the Pacific Northwest in the late 1800s. And so in my mind, that was what was going on, right? So, like, and there's going to be some old building, and you guys helped reintroduce the oysters that you did, or helped actually clean up the Chesapeake Bay, right?
Right.
So walking in and seeing the board there this morning, I was like, oh, I think I'm kind of getting a different view here. And then talking with you, I'm like, much different than,
Yeah.
I mean, some of it we've talked about and I'd heard about in the past, but I thought it happened in different ways. For you, I mean, I was able to pick it up in a day only because it was there. What was your learning curve?
Steep, very steep. So, like I mentioned, we didn't have anything, right? No infrastructure, no equipment or anything. So we just researched what was happening in other parts of the world. We noticed, like, on menus, there were no oysters from south of New York, right?
Right.
And we're like, why is that? Well, because it's wild, dredged, muddy crap. And no one had leveraged aquaculture versus the Northeast, Northwest, France, Australia, everywhere else in the world except for the Chesapeake and Gulf of Mexico had moved over to aquaculture. The reason that we hadn't is because it was such a huge production out of the Chesapeake. It was so gigantic. I mean, at one point it was half of the world's oyster population was in the Chesapeake Bay. So it took us centuries to overharvest the Chesapeake. Same thing with the Gulf. It's just taken a lot longer. Whereas New York and San Fran, they overharvested in the early 1800s.
Right.
And so they had to adopt to aquaculture.
And when you say aquaculture, can you give me a brief synopsis? Because I'm sure, like, some people
Right.
may not
So
know.
it's kind of like the old method, dredging was like the hunter and gatherer mentality. So
Okay.
initially, like, you had these dead rise boats. You'll see some out here. They're actually converted to fishing boats now. But the dead rises would have basically, like, you call it plows, if you
Right.
will, dredges on the back of them that would just scrape up anything on the bottom. So for a while, you know, for centuries, it worked really well because there was so much abundance of oysters out there. So they would dredge them up, and since it was huge volume, it was a commodity, right? So they shucked it. You know, most of the market out there is a shucked market, not half shell. So they did that, you know, for centuries. But as you can imagine, when you tear up the bottom, you end up tearing up the subaquatic vegetation that holds the sand in place. So then you get murkier water, less fish can thrive. You take away the sanctuary with the oyster reefs that were there. So you've basically just decimated the whole ecosystem, and that's what happened. So it took us, you know, like I said, centuries, but we did it. So in 1970s and 80s, it just died out completely. 90s, you know, there were, I think, maybe like 20,000 bushels harvested per year, you know, in the entire Chesapeake. And
Wow.
we did that ourselves last year.
Usually we have to have harvesting by 10, and we have a thing called a track stick, which is GPS, that basically says, when we turn it on, it says, this is when we're going to start harvesting, and we have to harvest within like 2 hours, usually during the summer. And now it's switched to 5. We don't have to have harvesting until 12 now, so it's a little easier.
How long would you say it took you to go from, we're going to do this, to being operational?
Well, my cousin and I are stupid, and
It's funny because they come across completely
yeah.
differently than dumb.
well, we're like, hey, this is a lot of fun. So when we actually started this up, we recognized there were what's called oyster gardeners. There were these retirees who had these floats off their dock that were working with you know, the marine science in Virginia to try and grow native oysters, and they were having success because one of the issues in the 60s and 70s was MSX was in dermo, two diseases brought in from ships from, you know, foreign waters or whatever, that further decimated the population that we had. And oysters in the wild couldn't survive a second summer of exposure. With aquaculture, they were able to actually reach harvest size quicker, and thus, you know, we were like, let's use floating cages. So we I did some trials, learned a lot, killed a lot, but after like 6 months or so, we had, oysters like this size, and we couldn't wait any longer to try them, so we shucked them open. They were delicious.
And what part, where were you guys at as far as
we're actually further up the Rappahannock, closer towards the Tappahannock, which is kind of like the bare minimum salinity required to survive. Because again, we had no grounds other than what we inherited, but we didn't have the boats to access those grounds. So we started off at a friend's backyard, then until we were able to get a boat to move to our location. So grew them out, thought they were awesome, noticed that aquaculture could work, and then decided to like lay down a credit card and go in debt, start it up.
You did it on credit card?
Oh yeah.
And here you are.
Banks wouldn't talk to you at the time, right? The family thought it was kind of a silly thing because, I mean, at the time, you got to think about it, you were a chef, right? You didn't see any oysters sold on half shell from the South. Right?
No, absolutely not.
Yeah. So that was a huge barrier to entry, was having to knock on doors, break down walls to educate people on what we were doing.
Once you get in, especially when the knife is sharp, you just pivot the knife and cut the muscle. And then we give it what we call the Rappahannock roll. We roll the oyster so the plump side comes out.
A lot of this is fortuitous, being like the first ones to do it, right? So we went up to New York because Ryan's brother, my other cousin, lived in Brooklyn. So we go up there, get Zagat Guide, what's the best restaurant in town, LeBaron Inn, call them up, go in. No clue how hard it is to actually get like an audience like that. We were just so dumb. But anyway, we lucked out because no one was doing that at the time. Like farmers weren't knocking on doors at the time. So it was like, hey, come on in, guys. And, we lucked out because when we went up there, we were having a drought here on the Rappahannock. So these were saltier than they normally are. Lots of East Coast chefs prefer saltier oysters.
Yep.
I do as well when I'm drinking beer, right? So we quickly realized through our conversations with chefs who were like, these are awesome, but, also I do like, saltier products, as well as going to Grand Central Oyster Bar and recognizing that they had, 12 oysters from a mile radius in Massachusetts that all taste exactly the same.
Yep.
And to having one from the Chesapeake Bay, just called Chesapeake. And the Chesapeake's the largest estuary in the country. It's humongous for Virginia and Maryland. And we're like, we need to bring back like the appellations of the oysters, because you can like eBay or Google like oyster tins, and every like section of the river had its own brand of oyster back in the day.
Right.
So we wanted to bring that back, and so we're like, all right, we got to open up a place that has the saltiest oyster on the market. So let's go over to Chincoteague and open up a farm. So we did that, and then we want to kind of round it out with something in between the two because the Rappahannock's super sweet and Old Salt's super salty. So we started with the Stingrays, which are now the Rochambeaus that we're selling. So they're in the middle, and so that way, we were able to use the term terroir, taken off of terroir with wine, that oysters take on the flavor of the environment where they're grown. So the Rappahannocks, there's no industry or cities on it whatsoever. It's up the bay quite a bit, so it's sweeter oyster. You taste like the minerality of the meat itself. Not a lot of salinity to it. You got the Blue Ridge Mountain runoff coming down to the Rappahannock, so that's super unique on the eastern seaboard. The Rochambeaus at the mouth of the York River, so closer to the ocean flow coming in and out, but not quite on the ocean. So it's definitely like a middle tier in terms of salinity. So a huge contrast with the Rappahannock. And then, for those that like, a lot of cold beer, salty oysters, the old salts and Chincoteague are the best. And the cool thing is they still have a unique sweet finish after it.
And you were saying how like most chefs prefer the saltier oyster, and honestly there wasn't a huge difference from going Maine down into, they all pretty much really did taste the same.
They're very similar.
In my mind it was always like you had East Coast oysters and you had West Coast oysters. One of the byproducts of you guys doing this has been a cleanup of the mess that was created from the previous way that we went about it and harvest it. That was how far after you opened when people started to recognize what you did for the Chesapeake?
Pretty quickly we got, I think it was 2005 5 Food and Wine Taste Makers Award, which was huge for us, obviously, because this here name print was pretty earth-shattering.
Especially Tastemaker Award, you know.
Especially not hanging up in the post office. But you know, because of this being like a new product, and because of our Forrest Gumpian stupidity of saying, "Hey, let's shoot for like the top chefs," you know,
Right.
why not? We actually were able to land top chefs, and so went to markets at that echelon, and we had to, because no one else would think about the product and what it meant. But those, you know, higher end chefs are up there for a reason,
Yep.
you know, and so we targeted in every city the best of the best, and they got it, and they would help us push the product, promote it, and everything. So we got into that group, if you will, and still, you know, friends with everyone.
And when you first started, though, I mean, that wasn't really necessarily your end game, right? I mean, did you guys go into it? Were you also like, we're going to be, you know?
No, we wanted to improve the health of the Bay. That was always one of our missions. And, you know, at the time when we started, there was a huge fight to bring in a foreign species to replace our oyster, Arikensis, a Chinese oyster. And we had to like fight against that initially. So it's been fighting the whole time.
Right.
First, fighting for acceptance of the oysters, breaking down those walls, fighting the introduction of a non-native species, which is never a good idea. And we won that over time. And then been trying to champion that, you know, the more oysters in the Bay, the better. So we've always encouraged competition. Other people, we bring them to our farm, show them how we do things, and we actually began this, or maybe like 3 or 4 commercial oyster farmers of varying size, and now in Virginia and Maryland it's like 300 or 400.
Oh wow,
it's crazy. So, which is great. More oysters, better water for everybody, and it's really paying off.
So you guys got this place going, and then you opened up where we're sitting now, which is Miroir,
right?
Oyster Bar.
We rented a slip here starting off, and then to get to our grounds, and then this became available in an auction. And normally, you know, I hate to take advantage of a situation like that, but the previous owner was a racist asshole, so it worked out. So we were able to
Didn't feel so bad.
Clean up, welcome everyone back, you know, and
so when you say it was up, you're talking about all of this space here?
This whole thing, yeah.
Oh, wow.
So we went from renting like a small slip to buying the place, fixing it up. I mean, it's taken us a decade to like fix it up. I mean, there's always something. When we got it, there were debris piles everywhere. This building was pink. No one would come anywhere close to it anymore. So we fixed it up and kept modifying it. And we had a concept of opening up a tasting room, so we could pair our oysters, 3 types that we had, with Virginia beer and wine, and that was it. And then before we opened it, we were in Denver talking to 30 of the best chefs out there and doing our thing, you know, giving them the spiel. And then at the end of it, we're like, hey, this summer we're going to open up our own little tasting room, so when you come by for a tour, we can feed you all this. And this after that conversation, this little short fat dude walks up, Peter Woods. He's working at Tony's Market out there, their seafood counter. He's like, I'm from Philadelphia. I worked in Richmond for 10 years. I'm moving back home. I work for you guys. Open up the place. I'll see you in a couple months. I'm like, yeah, sure, whatever.
He said he told you he's worked for you?
Yeah.
That's awesome.
He's his last job I'm ever going to have. And so we forgot about him. A month and a half later, he popped in here on Anthony. We were out of town somewhere. His son was graduating from VCU. He was like, hey, reminder, tell those guys I'm going to start pretty soon. So we're like, all right, he's tenacious, so let's give him a phone interview. And we asked him like one question, hey, how do you make a crab cake? He's like, all crab. It's like, all right, you're hired. So we got a grill in addition to the tasting stuff. And then it just snowballed. We had first like month, we had like 2 people a night, then 4 people, then 8 people. Then all of a sudden it just got bigger and bigger. And then this is a summer town, obviously, so the winter time slowed up a little bit, and then, you know, we didn't think of it. The first nice weekend in March, we had 400 people out here.
And did you stay open through the winter months?
We stayed open, and we had, you know, a trickle. It was open like 5 days a week. But then, you know, that first nice Saturday in March, you know, we just got overrun. Anthony was here like working on his own boat. Called me up. He's like, We need help. We need help. I came down there last time I cried. We were just so many people you couldn't keep up. Like a waiter's like worst nightmare, right?
Oh yeah.
So then we're like, we got to hire the actual general manager, and we got a great one, and she's just turned this thing around. And so this was a 1 in a million shot, you know. So the bad news is, I guess it's good news. We thought restaurants were easy because this place was always packed, and now we found out that's not the case.
So it's funny. So you had the reverse experience that a lot of people that do. You know, they open these things up and they end up like just tanking because they're ill prepared for it. And you guys just went into it. It's like, yeah, we got the space. We're going to do it. And now you have 5.
Yeah, we opened up for $2,000 here. I think we had a grill and we had a health department made us put a 3-bin sink, things like that. So it's like $2,000 opening. So I was like, oh, restaurants are easy to open too. You know,
there's no price for that.
Now I'm so far in debt, who knows? But yeah, so this was fantastic. Then the developers for Union Market in DC came by here to check us out and said, hey, this is actually what we want to have in the marketplace.
And that was your second place, right?
That was our second opening. And again, you know, day one, the place is packed, not because of us, but the whole market and stuff. But you know, a month in, you know, the Journal actually rated us top 5 oyster bar in the country.
You guys crushed it. I remember reading it. I was like, couldn't happen to better people. And it seemed like I turned around and it was like opening up another one.
I was like, Ryan, who'd you pay? He's like, who'd you pay? I was like, I don't know. They put us in there, so we'll take it.
Right.
But that place has its own following. It's my favorite place, I think. And then we opened up Richmond because, you know, Richmond's our backyard, and we wanted to have recognition up there. And then we were looking at this tiny space nearby Jason Alley's newest restaurant, Pasture. And then literally when we're like evaluating the lease and stuff, we get this email from Dylan Fultonier, who was one of our first chefs we met in Chicago. He's like, hey, I'm moving back east. I'd like to. Always want to partner up with you guys. You know, let me know if you have any thoughts. We're like, we'll do. All right, we'll take this lease and also tear down the wall and take over the space beside it and do a restaurant in Richmond, which is called Rappahannock, which in 14 we got Esquire Best New Restaurant.
Right.
Then that's when the challenges started coming.
So when you say challenges started to come in, what do you mean?
Well, you know, Rappahannock's, you know, was kind of upscale casual, so, you know, this menu is more complex, more labor, you know, so, you know, we never had to analyze food costs or labor costs at this place ever, right? It's just like, all right, that's awesome.
Right.
So we didn't actually learn the restaurant business until about 2 years into it. We're like, oh, we need to start looking at like P&Ls and things like that, you know?
Right. This is where the finance comes into play.
Yeah, so still trying to come into play. And then, you know, everything does go wrong that can go wrong. Just realize it's not as easy as it seemed, you know, when we opened this place up 6 years ago.
Right. It's a little bit
You don't
different.
always have 800 people like coming through your door, you know, at each restaurant. But we've learned a lot, and still a lot to learn.
All right, so we touched base on RVA a little bit. Tell me a little bit about Charlotte. Like, how did you manage to make that jump? Why did you make that jump?
Several reasons, man. One, my sister lives down here and never get to see her family, so I figured this would force me to see them.
Did you say force you to see them?
Force me to see them, force them to see us. But more importantly, Charlotte's always been of interest to me. 4.5 hours from Richmond. You took all of our banking business, so I'm coming back to take some money back.
Was Richmond a banking town?
Richmond had all of the banks that are now here were headquartered in Richmond.
Wow, that was one thing I was completely unaware of.
Yeah. So you had a little bit better city council than we did for a while. But so Charlotte's always been interesting. Food scene, I feel like, is coming up. We love expanding what we do, oysterletizing, I guess you could say.
Right.
And you know, the landlord here, Eden's, is they run Union Market in DC, and they say, hey, come down here and check out the space, which was a laundry cleaner.
Yeah. So, you know, it's funny. My first job in Charlotte is exactly 2/10 of a mile up the road here. This was when I first moved here, this whole area. This is a huge change. I actually remember when this was a dry cleaner building, and it seemed like the worst waste of a really cool building.
Yeah, it's an awesome building. We got death threats when construction began because people love that laundry cleaner building.
Yeah.
They loved it. But, hey, we're overlooking the waterfront right here, Sugar Creek.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, can't beat that, right? So we just kind
I think everything in Charlotte overlooks Sugar Creek.
Yeah, I think so too, yeah.
It's the most meandering river I've ever seen. Creek I've ever seen.
Came down, checked it out. I love that it was behind. The vision was, hey, 5-year plan. It might suck for a couple of years when no one else is open.
Right.
I was like, no, we'll be fine. But it did kind of suck for a couple of years because there was no one back here. But now with Omley's, Midwood, some other stuff, rising tide, lifts all ships. We've seen it happen in Richmond, with restaurants proliferating and then everyone makes more money. That's actually my favorite restaurant that we have. Is super cozy inside, awesome patio outside, and we're able to talk about our oysters, but also other stuff from Mid-Atlantic. The underutilized fish, that's a big focus of us, from, I think last night we had, porgies, grunts, things like that.
Yeah, I saw you had grunt on there, dude. I remember fishing
awesome,
for that
man.
when I was in Florida.
It's awesome. So, what I do with the oysters, that was one conversation. So rock salt to me is a continuation of that, maybe like advancing it even further. So not just my story, but also let's serve fish that isn't on menus everywhere.
Right.
The serve was actually available for fishermen to actually catch versus forcing them to follow a couple species, over-harvest the hell out of them just because restaurants demand that on their menus.
Right.
So let's put things on I love Spanish mackerel. So that's out there. Fishermen can catch it, bring it in. They have a livelihood. They don't have to go up and down the coast chasing migrations of, whatever's in demand. So we want to focus on that, local proteins, produce, stuff like that.
So how has Charlotte reacted to having, this is sort of our first, our seafood restaurant that we've had here, meaning that, there's other restaurants we've had here that have been considered seafood joints, but they're buying from, outside sources. You're an owner that is bringing your product directly in.
Right.
Do you think that's been a leg up? Have people responded to that well? Has there been a learning curve involved with it, or is it a combination of all of that?
Combination. I think I need to do a better job of getting out there more and getting the story out. I think a lot of people that come in don't realize where the oysters are coming from or that I own on the restaurant. So, getting some continuity with that, increase some awareness. I think when we are able to have people come in here and their servers, bartenders, managers educate folks on what we're doing, then we have customers for life. We had some blips in the road when we opened up, like all restaurants do. I learned Charlotte's kind of different town. Like you said, they all come out at first, and then the huge drop off, and then we had issues like the parking lot. They decided to repave the whole thing, so we had bulldozers beside customers out here, right? So that kind of hurt for a little bit, but all that's
that was odd.
Yeah,
I remember rolling up in here. I was like, I'm gonna just pull. I'm like, oh my god, there's no parking.
Yeah, can you imagine just eating and all of a sudden you got
dust.
This dude just bulldozing dirt right beside you. So we had some of that stuff, yelp, hey, I'm eating in the parking lot, but but I think we've gotten past that point. Food's fantastic. I'm super stoked about where we are now.
All right, man. Well, on that note, I think we hit everything.
Yeah, man. Let's try some oysters. How about that?
You got it. I appreciate everything. Oh, look at that. And that.
Don't leave home without it.
Oh, shucks.
See if I still have the skills to pay the bills. So there's two thought processes on shucking, right? This is the hinge side.
That's the way I do it.
That's the way most people do it. It's pretty good. I'm terrible at this. That's why I hire people now. I butchered that one. Let's take care of that one. And then there's the lip method, where you go in around here and you push down. This is how all the shucking houses shuck their oysters.
I always end up cracking that delicate lip.
Yeah, but this way you don't actually break the hinge, and you don't cut the meat. In theory.
Right. Is this how Pete does it?
This is how Pete does it. Yeah. And see.
Oh wow.
This way, nice clean cut, yeah, you didn't cut anything, right?
Cheers.
Cheers. The old salt. What do you got?
I think I got an old salt as well, based
Perfect.
on the salt and cup. Man, that's good. All right, shut that thing off. We got to go eat. touch Travis's butt.
Again.
I can't believe I said that out loud. I'm so sorry.
Hey, no worries.
All right, so let's see.
Those are outtakes.
They're all outtakes, Peter. Dude, I look pretty. That's my job. I'm vacuous. I just follow your lead. I'm reading it. Totally Ron Burgundy in it.